This is The Golden Rule with David Fischer. For the latest information about bail-ins, bailouts, the economic collapse, and much more, go to landmarkgold.com.
Well, welcome to The Golden Rule. This is CEO David Fischer of Landmark Capital, and this is podcast number 30. I want to say, first and foremost, thank you for listening to our podcast. We hope that they're being helpful and informative, thought-provoking, maybe a little humorous, not so much that, but most importantly, empowering you with knowledge so you can act accordingly, protect your money from the government's ill will. That's mostly what we talk about. But if you're listening to the podcast 30 here for the first time listening to the podcast, do yourself a big favor and go back to podcast number 29, because this is really the second part of the two podcasts together. Because of the huge timing I've timed together, they would be, I divided up into two, and this is really the second part. But you can start here and then make sure you go back to 29, because it'll make a lot more sense, podcast 30. So in podcast 29, a quick review, we just talked about the thing called the Dodd-Frank Act. So today, we're going to talk about something that is unconstitutional, completely, in my mind, unconstitutional. And according to Steve Forbes, he said on last Sunday as I was watching Fox News, he fully says the same thing. Our government, unfortunately, does a lot of things unconstitutional. For example, the Federal Reserve. We broke Article 1, Section 3. The government has the only right to coin money, and in 1913 we gave that power over to a group of bankers, and therefore they created a thing called the Federal Reserve, which is not federal and it has no reserve, became an independent entity of its own that not even Congress or the president has any power over. I know I'm just repeating things that you probably heard before, but you got to make sure you understand that, because I'm going to revert back to this in a second. Not even the president can ask Janet Yellen to step down, and neither can he do something to this organization called the Federal Reserve. In fact, Congress a few years ago tried to have an audit. That was turned down by the Fed. They said, no, we're not going to do that. So our government and the people have no power over the Federal Reserve. Of course, it wasn't set up that way, but that's how it turned out to be. Well, it was set up to control our money. They control interest rates. They do create money out of thin air, and we have no jurisdiction over them to tell them to lower or raise interest rates or stop printing enormous amounts of money or print more. They do it on their own with nobody to tell them different. Another agency was created with the same model. Ironically, they're attached to the Fed. This was created, which is what I mentioned in the end of podcast number 29. The Dodd-Frank Act, a bill that was passed in 2010, was the bill that created a monster called the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. It was created to protect us from bad things happening. Created and authorized by Dodd-Frank, established in 2011 as an independent agency located within the government, but get its funding from the Federal Reserve, which is not federal, a government agency. And as I said, it's not federal and has no reserve. But the CFPB is housed at the Federal Reserve, yet has direct affiliation with the U.S. Treasury. You're going to learn about that why today. This is a very big key. In fact, podcast number 29, podcast number 30, out of all the 30 podcasts I've done, are probably the most important podcasts I've ever done. So listen to this, okay? This is all coming because I lost my voice for a week and I couldn't talk, and that's what I do for a living. So instead of that, I saw what was happening in local news, being talked a lot about the Dodd-Frank and also the CFPB, so I did an intensive search. I've searched it and studied it before, but never like this. So I'm going to give new information, what I found out. Some of this might be not new to you, but let's go with it, okay? Back to the CFPB. It has full financial jurisdiction. It is the only entity in our government that operates the way I'm describing. Where I got my data, multiple reports from Fox News, Reuters, mainstream media. Again, full financial jurisdiction to control banks, credit unions, security firms, and multiple other financial security services in the U.S., like payday loans, mortgage institutions. You name the financial entity or the financial product, and it has control over it. That is the power of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Fox News did a study on this saying that it is frightening. They came to this conclusion. Quote, it has boundless authority to interfere in nearly any consumer financial transaction, any product, anywhere in the economy, and to do so without any accountability to the American people and their elected officials, quote unquote. Reading on from the report, the budget comes not from Congress through the annual appropriations process, but directly from the Federal Reserve. But the Federal Reserve itself is prohibited from exercising any oversight. What do we have? An independent agency that cannot be told what to do or be removed from its power. Fox News. I know this sounds like something scientific. Of course, we have something already like this. It's called the Federal Reserve. President Trump, nor neither president, has any power over the Federal Reserve, unfortunately, and it grew into a beast. And it was totally unconstitutional. So imagine in 1919, 6 years later, after the Federal Reserve was created, Congress is looking back and say, why did we do that? They're scratching their heads. Well, that's what's going on right now. There's a movement to say, hey, everybody, wake up. This is unconstitutional, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. But I think it's too late, too sorry, unfortunately. I would love somehow, some way for both entities to be dissolved and be replaced. But the fact is, it probably won't happen. And the challenge is very challenging. From this standpoint, let's go back in history and walk down memory lane for a second. Shortly after the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was established, there was a man by the name of Richard Cordray. He was the head of the Bureau. And in 2012, he went before Congress saying that the CFPB is here weighing on whether it should take an active role in helping Americans manage their money, the $19.4 trillion they have put into retirement savings. This was a move that was the first move of the agency in its first foray into consumer investments. It took further step, citing the Dodd-Frank Act, noting that they had the legal authority to manage retirements and claim jurisdiction over them, though through an office called the Office for Older Americans. Probably going, what is that? Well, it was created by Dodd-Frank, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau runs it. Established as a mandate by the Dodd-Frank Act, in fact, this would be the entity that the CFPB said they're the entity that needs to manage, or should I really just say it, seize your retirement accounts, which the Bureau has now the power to do so. This was reported in Bloomberg News, referring this to the power it has, and it talked about this whole concept and even has a name for it in our government called the rollover moment. This is what they call how they seize your money. A rollover moment. Well, but the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was established to help you manage your money. Well, you probably know you need help managing money. Well, they're there for you. Call them up. But the reality is, they've done some good things. How about Wells Fargo and the money that Wells Fargo did not legally take from people through erroneous setting up accounts and charging these fees? Consumer Financial Protection Bureau found that. There's a few other things they've done too. When people's homes were foreclosed upon illegally, not all of them were done illegally, but the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau got involved in that. So I guess there's a few silver linings to this cloud, but the rain cloud found a foundational standpoint, evidence of the director going before Congress with only a month of being assigned to that private entity fully wants to get your money. And that today is, as Paul Harvey says, the rest of the story. But it goes on one more thing from there. News has gotten this out to Republicans, and they finally have woken up. I don't know what's going on with our Congress, why they were asleep with this. But I guess we've been asleep before, so it's not the first time, because otherwise we wouldn't have the Federal Reserve. So at sleep at the wheel, they passed this law, and now we're waking up. They are waking up. Recently, they tried to stop this from happening. They tried to get rid of it, in fact. tried to not repeal it, get rid of it. In fact, there was a court announcement on it, and the courts just today, on the recording of this podcast, the 16th, they threw a lifeline to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They're saying it is, we don't know if it's illegal or not, we don't think so. But here's what happened in the federal court appeals. It reconsiders its earlier ruling that would have increased the president's authority to govern Consumer Financial Watchdog Agency and target of a criticism for banks and Republican lawmakers. It was a divided three-judge panel that ruled last year that the way the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is organized violates the Constitution, separation of powers by limiting the president's ability to fire the agency director. So this is not about should we keep it or not. This is about, can the president remove Richard Cordray? Well, he can't remove the Fed chairman, Janet Yellen, until she steps down on her own in 2018. And we're probably going to find Richard Cordray, a Democrat, appointed by President Obama for a 5-year term, which ends next year, probably will stay into that position when the full U.S. Courts of Appeals of the District of Columbia probably will grant the permission of that ruling and hear arguments in this case once again on May 24th of this year. The banking industry has viewed the CFPB, though, as a thorn in its side, accusing of overreaching in its regulation of consumer financial activities. And Trump has promised to dismantle the 2010 law and create the Bureau in response to the financial crisis. I like what Trump says, but unfortunately a lot of things he says doesn't happen. We're learning that right now in getting his tax reform, repealing and replacing Obamacare. And those are things that aren't entities or agencies within our separate from our government. So this is another thing of another topic, a different beast, as they say. So we're going to see on May 24th if the full panel of the judges allows the CFPB to not have the hand slapped on what they did with different entities in mortgage and going against a mortgage company that foreclosed on Americans. That's what this is all about. It's not about undoing the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So it is, though, talking about the Constitution and the power it has, and I hope they move to dismiss the power of this entity. But they weren't successful, certainly, in doing that with the Federal Reserve. So what has happened? An entity that I have said has enormous power, and previously have written in our white paper called The Coming Bail-In that President Obama would be the entity, the person that would trigger the bail-in. Here's where I need to apologize to you. I'm wrong. He never had that power. I just assumed since he set all this up, he would have the power. But in detailed study, according to Fox News and many other resources like them, it's this agency, and they already have the name of the agency, the entity within the agency that would be the linchpin for this all to happen through, like I mentioned. So I will keep watching it. I'll be your eyes and ears on this. But until then, right now, your money is not safe. The legal, as I said in podcast 29, the legal ramifications by the Dodd-Frank Act allows the Consumer Financial Protection Agency to seize your money at any time for any reason, wherever it's at, and doing it through the Office for Older Americans. So this is why we encourage you to get educated, roll over your 401k, your IRA to physical gold and silver, and take physical possession. If you not know how to do that, I'm not talking about having it in a depository. I'm talking about having it physically in your hands under the umbrella of a retirement and IRA without a tax liability. People that hear this the first time, they go, how can that be? I will explain that in depth. Is it in writing? And I even give the IRS ruling on it in a white paper that I wrote that will tell you exactly how that is, and I cite court experience and law. So I want to move on to one more quick subject that goes with this, and that is something that's happened very disturbing, and that is, most people are not aware, but there's been a massive sell-off in the U.S. Treasury market. I want to tell you why this is happening and where it's going and how this will affect you. So keep in mind, let's put it all together real quickly. Our government is in a spending spree. We're $20 trillion in debt. We spend more than we take in. So we're in a deficit. A monthly deficit is currently $66 billion. Multiply that over a year, we're $750 billion. We add interest, we're almost $1 trillion that gets added to the national debt automatically with no more spending bills intact. That's where we're going. So we have a deficit of $66 billion. And when we have a deficit, when we spend more than we take in, we call up the Treasury, and the Treasury creates a note called a Treasury bill out of thin air with the full faith of the government to back it. That Treasury bill is gets auctioned off on Wall Street, and Wall Street, an entity, usually a foreign central bank, buys that Treasury bill. They're buying our debt. They're paying us money. We use that money to shore up the shortage of the $66 billion a month, and that's how we keep this thing moving and working. But we got to pay back that money, though. You know, the note that we created from the U.S. Treasury, plus interest on the money. We got to make sure that the world keeps buying our debt, and that's what keeps this thing working. But there's a new trend that started in 2011. I started watching it. Wasn't talking too much about it, but it started, and that's when foreign central banks started to sell U.S. Treasuries. It wasn't much at first, so it wasn't alarming and not much newsworthiness. That was then, and this is now. Last December 2016, the U.S. Treasury reports that the sell-off of U.S. Treasuries is at record high. What is that? The most they've sold ever, foreign central banks, ever, in 1 month. It's gone up since 2011 till now, rather consistently. And December of 2016 is the highest. The number is $70.8 billion. Let's put this together now. They're selling back this U.S. Treasury. If we created it, the Treasury, we sold it, we took their money, they're selling it back, they want their money back for that, plus interest, so we buy it. Where's that money coming from if we have a deficit of $66 billion a month? The Treasury doesn't have that money. That's why they issue the Treasury. Otherwise, we wouldn't need to issue Treasuries. We would just ask the Treasury to give us the money that's already there as a country, the government. But this is why they issue Treasuries. So, not only do we have to keep selling $66 billion a month in Treasuries, now we have to buy back $70.8 billion a month in Treasuries that are being sold. That's $136 billion of outflow of money a month. Somebody's playing the shell game on us, if you add simple math. So my question is this: why are foreigners selling Treasuries when we're the safest currency in the world? And a Treasury bill is the safest financial instrument in the world. Maybe it's not what everybody thinks it is. There must be a reason why smart foreign central bankers are selling U.S. dollars. We know they've been buying gold. That's another topic for another day, but I have a lot of factual information on that. That's why gold has gone up, and I've talked about this in previous podcasts. But for the reason, why are they selling at record pace now? When foreign central banks are forward-thinking into the future, they must see something coming. So, let's tie it all together, ending with this. At the end of the day, somebody has to hold the dollar. And this system I just spelled out clearly, which is how it works, the financial backbone of our country is broken. We are paralyzed. We have to do something. The options are very simple. We either default, and President Trump talked about defaulting through negotiating the debt that we owe. In other words, we got $66 billion going out. We got $70.8 billion still going out every month that we got paid. So let's negotiate that down to a lesser number. It's a financial obligation. That's what President Trump talked about when he was campaigning. Wouldn't work. It would cause havoc and be the default, first time in the history of our country ever doing that. But that is a choice. Probably not going to choose that one. How about they tried to create $1 trillion Treasury note and sell a coin? That gimmick lasted for about a week a few years ago. Nobody bought it. In fact, the Treasury had egg on his face. That's another idea. Create something new, the fandangled way of doing business. Or how about this way? Do what most countries have done. Inflate your way out of the problem. Now, as I was studying this, Fox News Sunday night had a panel. Steve Forbes was on the panel, and he clearly said all this is unconstitutional, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. It is going to turn into a big mess, he said. So, with this, the selling of foreign banks selling our debt, it is going to turn into a mess, and this is where the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau comes into effect, I think. So let's put it together now. We could inflate our way out of this, and that's what Janet Yellen is getting ready to do. She announced this a couple of days ago, that rates are artificially low and need to be brought up to the normality. Rates are 28% at the highest point in the history of 50 years, the lowest. We just came off them at a quarter of a point. 5.3% is the normal, and that's where they're trying to get to, around 4%. But once they start this process, it's going to cause inflation, which causes stocks not to perform very well. Gold goes up, is the best environment, and they devalue our currency through inflationary mechanisms. That's another choice. And it looks like that is the choice that the Fed is going to take. They've said it several times, and now they made a major announcement on it. The Asian markets picked up on this. I saw a commentary, and they exactly said this is how America is going to take care of its debt. CNBC News Asian markets 2 days ago. Or the last way is never been done in America, but been done in 9 countries. It's called a bail-in. I've talked about it before, and this is where the Treasury comes into play. That's where the money goes. The Treasury needs the money because nobody's buying their note, called the Treasury bill. So this is why, emphatically, like never before, get some education, call my company. I'll even go as far as this. You hear this from another company that has talked as much as I know about this, and I've been doing this for 23 years, and there's no pressure from us, and if there's no pressure from them, call both companies and compare the difference. In all my research and study, I've not yet found a company out there in my industry that has the lowest fee structure to accomplish this, where you can take legal possession of your money in the form of metals under the umbrella of an IRA without a tax liability. There's companies that do this, but you don't get your metals. They're in a third-party depository. That's not going to help you once they flip the switch and do a bail-in. Having it in your hand is certainly going to help you. But most people have to go through a whole bunch of reporting, tax reports, filing a tax return to do this, annual meetings, getting an EIN number. None of that needs to be done. The mechanism that this attorney that I've used has done thousands of these for our clients. So call my company. You'll learn all about it. No pressure, but let's get educated because things have drastically changed in just my world the last week on what I found out here. It's more critical than ever. They're getting more power. Now they have all the power they need. It can happen any day, according to the Vice President of the Federal Reserve called Stanley Fischer. He said that 2 years ago, August 14th, no relationship to me. So let's get the facts. Call my company. I'll help you understand it. We'll send you out a report that's every bit of it can be documented. It'll cause you of great concern, as well this should, but there's ways of fixing that. 877-448-2646 or go to my website, landmarkgold.com. I'll say the phone number again, 877-448-2646. Thanks for listening in. Again, David Fischer, CEO of Landmark Capital. You're listening to the Golden Rule, podcast number 30. Until next time, podcast number 31. I'm not even going to tell you what it is, but it's probably not going to be as scary as this, but I'm going to tell you something else that's getting ready to happen too. Until then, take care.
This has been another installment of The Golden Rule with David Fischer. To stay up to date and find out the latest information, go to landmarkgold.com.
Group of bankers, and therefore they created a thing called the Federal Reserve, which is not federal and it has no reserve, became an independent entity of its own that not even Congress or the president has any power over. I know I'm just repeating things that you probably heard before, but you got to make sure you understand that because I'm going to revert back to this in a second. Not even the president can ask Janet Yellen to step down, and neither can he do something to this organization called the thing that is unconstitutional, completely, in my mind, unconstitutional. And according to Steve Forbes, he said on last Sunday as I was watching Fox News, he fully says the same thing. Our government, unfortunately, does a lot of things unconstitutional. For example, the Federal Reserve. We broke Article 1, Section 3. The government has the only right to coin money, and in 1913 we gave that power over to Gritty. I want to say, first and foremost, thank you for listening to our podcast. We hope that they're being helpful and informative, thought-provoking, maybe a little humorous, not so much that, but most importantly, empowering you with knowledge so you can act accordingly, protect your money from the government's ill will. That's mostly what we talk about. But if you're listening to the podcast 30 here for the first time listening to the podcast, do yourself a big favor and go back to podcast number 29, because this is really the second part of the two podcasts together. Because of the huge timing I've timed together, they would be, I divided up into two, and this is really the second part. But you can start here and then make sure you go back to 29, because it'll make a lot more sense, podcast 30. So in podcast 29, a quick review, we just talked about the thing called the Dodd-Frank Act. So today, we're going to talk about something.
This is the Golden Rule with David Fischer. For the latest information about bail-ins, bailouts, the economic collapse, and much more, go to landmarkgold.com.
Well, welcome to the Golden Rule. This is CEO David Fischer of Landmark Capital, and this is podcast number 30.